Hello and welcome to Self-Publishing with ALLi, the podcast that brings you all the advice, news, and inspiration an indie author needs today. Thanks to our sponsor, BookVault.app. They enable authors to sell high-quality print-on-demand books, including stunning special editions, directly to readers worldwide. And today, you're listening to our Creative Self-Publishing stream. It's brought to you by Orna Ross's Go Creative program, helping authors harness the power of creative flow in writing and publishing. And now, here's Orna Ross and Joanna Penn with today's episode.
Welcome to the Self-Publishing with ALLi podcast with me, Joanna Penn, and Orna Ross. Hi, Orna.
Hi, Joanna. Hello, everyone. Welcome back.
Yes, and here today we are going to be talking about what we've both been working on recently. And actually, we've got a lot of craft-related discussion going on today as we talk about writing, publishing and marketing, poetry and short fiction. So there are writing craft things in today's shows and also author business aspects. So this idea, and I had this idea about this show because, Orna, you shared a poem written about your mum's death on your Go Creative podcast. And I did tear up, and I'm sure a lot of people listening would have teared up too. And it must have been really hard to write. So I wanted to ask you, why did you decide to write a poem about this really difficult topic? And how do you know when something should be a poem as opposed to something longer?
Yeah, so poems pick me rather than me decide. I don't actually, with longer work, I will make a decision. I'm going to do a book on such and such. But poems kind of come along or they don't. And so this one arrived, and that's why I decided to do it. In terms of why I decided to share it, which is a relatively new thing for me to do, and certainly new to do on the Go Create podcast, and something I am going to be doing going forward, share the poetry. I'm challenging myself at the moment to kind of go out there more and share those things. Typically, I would have just share that with my poetry patrons. I wouldn't have gone any further with it. So now I'm trying to just, be more human in the world of AI, as you and I are talk about a lot, that whole double down on being human thing. Well, the reading a poem that you've written yourself is probably about as human as it gets. And so that's why I decided to write it. Then in terms of, how do you know whether something's a poem or something longer? For me, and again, I think it's really personal different for each writer, but for me, lyrical poems are short and just a single flash of feeling and image coming together, sort of concentrated emotion. So if I can sense the whole experience in a just one vivid moment kind of thing, that's a poem for me rather than an essay or a story. So there'll be an image and there'll be a feeling rather than, there may be an idea as well, but the image and the feeling are the main thing. If plots start coming in or characters, memories, side stories, anything like that, then it's a bigger thing, much bigger thing, usually for me. This is my novels are not small. But one scene, one beat, that's poetry.
And you mentioned there about, the doubling down on being human. And of course, this poem about the death of your mother, you can't get much more human than a poem about the death of your mother. I mean, AI could generate something, but that is a human experience, right?
Yes, 100%. And I believe that this is a personal belief of mine as a writer. It's one of my sort of writing credo, that the feeling and, emotion and experiences that you're having while you're writing a poem that kind of opens you out, that in some way that is conveyed to the reader, whose then experiences not exactly the same. They're going to bring their own stuff to it, but they're going to have a sense of that humanity in the poem. I do feel that is something that can't be replicated. Very hard to describe, very hard to explain where it comes from, where you see it in the text. But I believe it's there. But short stories are similar. No, you've been writing short stories recently, and how do you know when an idea is a short story or a longer story or a novel?
Yeah, I mean, I normally have like a story seed, and I guess I have story seeds for novels as well. And I want to explore that. But usually there has to be some kind of twist. So when I was growing up, I mean, I still read them sometimes, Roald Dahl's Tales of the Unexpected, which I loved. And if people have an idea of Roald Dahl, I know in some ways he's been edited these days, but pretty dark, children's writing as well. But the Tales of the Unexpected are adult short stories. And so I like having this sort of surprising or disturbing or unexpected sense about it. I do feel like you can explore different subgenres a lot more than novels. So, my novels tend to be action adventure or straight thriller or supernatural thriller. And then with my short stories, I get into all kinds of different things. So I've got some sort of techno thrillers. I do a lot of archaeology. I feel like I like to research a lot, but my short stories do have these sort of themes, and archaeology is certainly one of them. So I think if I don't want to turn it into something bigger, I definitely think every short story could be turned into some kind of novel, but I don't necessarily want to do that. So I just finished a short story. It's called Between Two Breaths, and it stems from an experience I had scuba diving in the Pornites Islands in New Zealand almost 25 years ago now, and I haven't actually written about it. Funnily enough, I had written a poem back then. I found it. It's dated 2005. So I guess that's 20 years ago. And I'm actually going to put that in the edition in my collection to go with that short story. But it's sort of an experience I had that I wanted to encapsulate in something short that leaves the reader with questions. And actually, as we're talking, I'm wondering if that's the difference, because with my novels, I do, as a reader, I hate a cliffhanger at the end of a novel. I want things to be wrapped up. And thrillers are, even if they're in a series, are usually completely wrapped up. So they're not like fantasy where you might have 7 books and there's cliffhangers on every one. So, but my short stories, they leave you with a question. And I find that that's really important. A bit like the Roald Dahl stories, you can still be thinking about them later because they haven't necessarily ended. So yeah, I guess that's the difference. And it's interesting because you said that the poem stems from emotion, whereas I feel like the short story, perhaps it's a story, it does start with either a character or a place. So, for example, when I went up to Ely Cathedral, it sort of sparked this idea about the area being drowned and this place called Seahenge, which kind of emerged from the waters, this prehistoric wooden circle. And I was like, I have to write a story about that. So that, I think that's kind of the difference, the emotion versus a place or a character. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that speaks to me. Though, of course, you can have character and place in story as well. Or, sorry, in poetry, you have to have it in story and narrative forms. But in poetry, you can have narrative elements as well. Poetry can be everything. And I think it very much depends on, what kind of poet you are. Just as, what you said there about your novel are wrapped up and your short stories and have a much more open ending. For another writer, it might be the other way around. And it's very much, I often feel, the forms that we write in, they choose us. And we've discussed this before in terms of the fact that writing across genre and across, the big macro genre of fiction and nonfiction. And then I do poetry as well. I mean, you wouldn't choose that if you were just operating from choice, would you?
No.
And in similar ways, I think the forms that we use, they kind of choose us a bit, don't they?
Yeah, and also for me, the short story, I don't necessarily. Well, I'm a discovery writer, as I've talked about before. I don't necessarily know what the twist is going to be or what ending I will leave with. So, although I say that Between Two Breaths, I absolutely knew how it would end. I actually started with the end, and then because that's the experience I had, and I wanted to communicate that feeling. Whereas Seahenge, I didn't know how it was going to end. I just knew that I wanted to have, the emergence of this prehistoric stone circle, and it had this upturned tree in the middle, and in the roots, something was there, like an ancient sacrifice. I love ancient sacrifice, as you know.
We'd have Joanna. Yes.
So I was like, well, what is it? What could that be? And that question of what could that be, I didn't necessarily know. And that's, it eventually came to it. And there's a lot of fun, and a lot of fun in the creativity of short stories, because it's so much shorter. And actually, I was going to ask you about this. So for me, writing a short story, it is a short process compared to a novel, because normally I write between, let's say, 5,000 and 10,000 words. I know the word count. So, it literally just doesn't take so long. It could take a couple of weeks, but it doesn't take forever. Whereas a novel, a lot more words. But how about you? Because I feel like a poem can actually take a lot longer. So tell us about the process for writing a poem. Do you start with loads of words and edit, or build up from a line? Like, what is the process?
Yeah, so just on the thing of brevity and short is one of the major reasons that I write poetry, because novels and nonfiction for me take a very long time, and almost all the poems that I have published, I write and publish them pretty quickly, actually. I don't, I have just one big epic that I've been writing for a long time, a long poetry sequence about women and writing and a tradition, the writing tradition, if you like. So it's a huge theme, and that one is taking a long time. But generally speaking, the fact that I can start and finish a poem sometimes in a day is just brilliant for me. And it keeps me, I think I can keep on with these big fiction projects and things because I get the satisfaction of putting poetry together in between. So not every poem is done in a day, not by any means. Sometimes they take weeks and sometimes they take a few months. But, that's nothing for me compared to big books. So, yeah. And in terms of then how I put it together, I only began to really produce poetry consistently when I adopted a technique that I learned from the great W.B. Yeats, who always wrote prose outline first. And it might sound really strange, but I never did that for a long time. And now that I do, it's made such a difference to actually finishing, because before I started to do that, I had, I don't know how many hundreds of unfinished poems. But now that I do the prose outline first, if I start the poem, I finish it. So I free write that summary by hand and kind of listening as I write more than I would if I was writing fiction or nonfiction, and then start reading it aloud. I'll take it for a walk, and just begin to kind of recite any lines that are in it. I'm looking for the rhythm and the pulse of it. Again, much more than I would be for fiction or nonfiction. And I'll start thinking about form. Should it be free verse? It would be, a sonnet or something else. At the moment, I'm looking at a Tavarimo, lots of trying to do a few poems in that form because I never did it before until recently. And then when I've thought, I kind of realised, okay, that's enough now, thinking and walking and reciting. And then I'll open a new file and then rewrite the whole thing as poem and then edit as much as needed from there. Sometimes it needs lots, sometimes only a little. Sometimes I'll take it for a walk again and again. Sometimes it'll just finish up, as I said, in a day. Not very often, but that does happen. I know when it's done. I just know. There's a sort of a click and there's nothing else to change, and there's a kind of a silence settles in around the words, and then I know it's finished. And I'm happy.
Yeah, well, it's really interesting. I think, was it Mary Oliver who said, like, sometimes she'd be out walking and a poem would come towards her and she knew she had to catch it, because if she didn't catch it, it would be gone.
Oh, that's the story that Elizabeth Gilbert tells in her TED Talk, isn't it?
Is it okay?
Black poet, I forget her name now, so it's not at the top of my head. But yeah, it's a brilliant story. She'd run back to the house to write it down before she missed it. What about your process for stories, short stories?
Oh, well, I need to stay on poetry a minute, because you made me, because the poem And people, I really recommend people go listen to you recite the poem for your mother. What's it called again?
It's called The Milky Ways.
Yeah, the Milky Ways. And some of those images stick in my mind. But of course, it was layered. It's a very specific moment, but it's layered with a lot of memory and other emotions other than grief, obviously. And so to me, it feels like some poems, and I feel like some of our creative works, whatever they are, poetry, short fiction, nonfiction, whatever, memoir, take a long, long time to come in some way, emerge. I mean, like this short story about the diving at the Poor Nights. I don't know why I didn't write that before. And it just feels like it took a very long time. So even though some of your poems you're writing quite quickly, do you feel like some of them, like the one for your mother, have taken a long time to come out?
Yes, definitely. Definitely. You can find yourself writing a poem about an experience that you'd forgotten about, even, and that is really, really a very long time ago. I feel an awful lot of the stuff that turns up in my poetry image-wise goes back to childhood. So in that sense, they've taken, half a century to get here and come out. And I didn't start writing poetry at all until I was in my 40s. I did as a teen, but I didn't then. And a friend died and so it just started me again. And I didn't really start writing it seriously until I was in my 50s, really. So I do think poetry, there are so many different kinds of poems. It's a macro genre, it has millions of genre within, but the kind of poems that I write, definitely, there's a maturity and a maturing of the ideas and things are necessary to them, I think. Yeah, definitely.
Mm-hmm. Well, I've, as you know, turned 50, so it maybe I'm coming into my next poetry period. But if people listening, if they want to start writing, because it feels to me very, even though I have written some and I've taken some classes and I do buy and read poetry, but it feels so daunting compared to writing fiction or nonfiction for me, even memoir. Writing a poem just seems so much weightier, I think, because perhaps I mainly read poems that are quite serious, and I love your poem, as I mentioned, and it feels so big. So if people listening, they want to write poems, but they don't really know how to start. You mentioned there a prose outline. So what even is that? Just explain like how someone might start.
Yes. So in terms of the prose outline, it would just say what poem is going to contain. So in the poem that you were talking about, literally just a moment standing at the window, looking out at the night sky, while behind me, knowing, my mother is in her bed and I can hear her breath, which is being artificially fed to her, and knowing that, we have been told that she doesn't have a long time. So the outline is just, the content, what's going to go in there. So it's best done, as I said, with free writing, fast, raw, let it all out, just kind of pour it down onto the page. And what you're looking for then is some words that have energy in that free writing word. Some words in there would have more energy than others. And so you kind of pull them out and start to, if it's a sentence, repeat that sentence in your mind and see what else comes. And you're looking for, for me, what's very important, what makes a poem and why I don't agree that, a lot of poetry that's called poetry, for me, if it doesn't have an image in it, then it's not really a poem. To me, it has to have emotion and image. And after that, then the best possible words and the best possible order. I forget who said that as a description of good poetry. But yeah, image and emotion to me are the heart of poetry. Otherwise, you might as well write prose. To me, that's what makes the difference. So maybe that's where some people feel the challenge. It's to get the right image to encompass the emotion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because of course, some poems have a certain, as you said, like a meter, or they're called a certain type. Like my scuba diving one is a pantoum, so it has a certain rhythm to it, and certain lines repeat, and all of this kind of thing. And that feels very like overly structured. And then, of course, we've got a lot of Insta poets who it might just be an emotion, or like it might even read like an affirmation. So it feels like there's a lot of freedom in poetry, but you can make it quite structured if you want to, right? If you feel like you need structure, there are structures you can go to.
100%. And then there can be the opposite of that, where the structure, it becomes a complete confinement, and that's not poetry either. So again, if it's playful and you're enjoying it, then it's poetic. But there's nothing poetic about trying to beat yourself into some form that's, your English teacher taught you 30 years ago and you think you should write, or whatever. Poetry can be anything. And that freedom can be, that can stop us. So if structure helps, use it. If structure doesn't help, let it go.
Yes, well, I guess for my short stories, it's the structure of a novel, in that, there's a character in a setting, something happens, or things happen, and then it ends somehow. I mean, like, I also feel like some people think that a short story has to be only one character in one setting and only one thing happens. But some of my short stories, so one in particular, de-extinction of the Nephilim. So it was based on, there's a company called Colossal, and they're de-extincting things. So they just did the direwolf, and they want to do the woolly mammoth and all this. And obviously Jurassic Park is the classic de-extinction story. But this one's about the Nephilim, and it has 3 point of view characters: an archaeologist and a geneticist and a maternity nurse. And so it was like, when that came to me, I knew the archaeologist had to find something underground, and that would then spark the rest of the story. And I didn't know that the other characters would come in, and that story ended up being, I think it's about 8,000 to 10,000, so it's a bit of a longer one. But I feel like if people feel like it can only be one character and one place and all that can hem you in as well. So I do tend, obviously a short story does have a certain word count. I don't submit to magazines or anything. I just publish them myself. I have been in a few anthologies. I've had a few stories commissioned, but generally I write in Scrivener exactly the same as I write my novels. And then I print it out and hand edit it. There are different scenes, sometimes like mini chapters. So that the extinction of the Nephilim, it's got like different chapters based on the different characters. And I still use Pro Writing Aid. I still work with my editor, Kristen. She edits my short stories as well. So I have exactly the same process, I guess, for short stories as I do for fiction. And the only difference is, I guess, the length, but also the leaving it with a sort of a question.
And do you ever put short stories up on your blog or anything like that? You don't blog anymore, do you?
No, but I sell them individually. So they are on all the usual stores. They're on my J.F.Penn Shopify store. And we're going to talk in a bit about the first print collection. But I find that actually, I mean, I've had people on my podcast, on the Creative Penn podcast, talk about you should always try and license short stories to magazines and anthologies and submit them to competitions first, because the contracts for short stories are some of the best in the business, in that the rights revert usually very quickly, and the contracts are often either for first print rights and they expire quite quickly, or subsequent print rights, and they're usually fine in terms of that people pay per word and all this. But I'm just so impatient that I normally, once I have, a bit like you, when I have an idea, I'm like, no, I need to write that story, and then I publish it and I send it out to my email list, and you can actually make some decent money even selling them at sort of 99 cents, which I feel, or $2.99, I suppose. But you can't price an individual short story at too high. I do also narrate them myself, the audiobooks, as human me. So that can kind of add in that human element as well.
And value. And the people who say, send them out, I think underestimate how much creative energy that whole submission process takes. Backwards and forwards. So I'm the same with poetry. I mean, people assume that you must submit poetry to journals and stuff. And I just never do, never have, never will. It just, if somebody approaches me or, I might reach out. I'm not saying never say never. I might decide I'd like to be in such and such a thing, but I need another reason to do it. So I have contributed to, at the moment, an anthology here in my new hometown of Hastings and St. Leonard's. There's a lovely anthology called Poet Town being put together, and I have fun in there. And also there's Washy Windows, which is a kind of a well-known series of women poets anthology in Ireland. I've got one in that. But generally speaking, I'm not going out there in the whole submission thing because it takes a lot of time and effort and energy to do that. And I'd rather write another poem, actually. So I just put them on my blog, at least 2 a month. The whatever my favorite 2 of the month kind of thing. One is for my patrons only, and kind of my best one of the month. And then when I have enough for a collection, I eventually publish it in book form, but that can take a long time. So I have different poems sitting in different collections that won't be published until there is enough in them. But I am now beginning to bundle and looking at special edition through Kickstarter. That is something I would like to do, probably for this book. And so the poem that you heard me read on the podcast is part of a collection of poems for bereavement, 12 poems to inspire a series, and these are the grief and bereavement ones. So yeah, I'm going to bring a few of those books together and create a special edition through Kickstarter in time for once there's enough.
Do you teach writing poetry as part of your Patreon, or do you do classes at all, or is that just not something you're
No, I did in the past, not anymore. Again, I'd rather just be doing it.
Oh, well, we might have to demand like a stretch goal for your Kickstarter where you will do a special webinar or something for those of us who...
That sounds okay. I'd be up for that.
Yeah, I think that would be great, because I feel like those of us who buy and read poetry often want to do more poetry. It's just that it feels important to me. It's really funny. Whereas I feel like my short stories, I write them and I'm really happy with them, and they encapsulate this moment. And then but I don't feel that they're heavy in any way. I don't know. Do you think that people have got the wrong impression of poetry by making it too serious?
Yeah, I think that's a bad place to start. It can be anything you want it to be. And I do think that's school, isn't it? Where they sat us down and chopped it up like, they sected it like it was a rabbit in science class or something. And that's not how poems are written, and it's not how they're read when you're reading for pleasure yourself. So, I would say just start with the poems you love and just start to write. I mean, you're a very experienced writer, so you can write poetry, no problem. It just depends then on what kind of poetry it is that you want to write, but definitely take away all it's got to be heavy and brilliant and, all of that, because that's a stopper for all writing, isn't it? If we feel that way about it. And I know you're exaggerating a bit, but yeah, it can be really playful poetry. And if you look at all the, inverted commas, great poets, once you read deeply into what widely into what they've written, you'll find that they've all written light, playful pieces, poems that aren't very good, really, that don't really quite work. And, they have their favorite kind of ways of going on. And all of those, in inverted commas, less than good, poems are part of what actually produces, one that does shine for and reach a lot more people. So, yeah, playful, I think I would think is the key word when it comes to writing poetry.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us about this collection that you're bringing together. Have you had challenges? Has it been?
Yeah. It's certainly a challenge. Like, first of all, I do think that I thought a bit like maybe how I feel about poetry, which is maybe I'm not worthy And I'm not really exaggerating. I do feel like because I studied English literature and, I can be too serious about all these things. I feel like Roald Dahl's Tales of the Unexpected, it's like a canon work in my mind. And to do a short story collection, well, in the sort of literary world, doing a short story collection published by a traditional publishing house is a really big deal because, let's face it, they don't make a ton of money.
Any money, generally.
Any money. Yeah. So
they're for super fans,
Yeah.
Or story collections are for super fans, which means an author can do really well with them, but publishers don't tend to do so well with them.
Yeah. So it does mean that the famous short story collections are sort of by big name authors. So I feel like that was the first challenge was, I couldn't do that. And then I was like, no, I really want to have my own collection in print because it's easy enough to do a short ebook and a short audiobook digitally, but none of these are in print. I do have a trilogy which is in print, which is 1,000 Fiendish Angels, which is 3 short stories inspired by Dante's Inferno. So that is in print, but the rest of them are not. And so I really wanted to do that. And so that was one challenge. I was like, should I do it? Now I really want to do it. And then it was, okay, what do you call it? And this kind of titling of a short story collection or that I haven't written to be related to each other was really hard. But this is where ChatGPT and Claude, I used both of them, uploaded all the audio, all the ebooks that I'd written, all the short stories, and asked for titles for the themes, asked it to really examine the themes across the whole thing. And people could use Notebook LM, Google's Notebook LM as well, anything where you can get it to really look at your work and kind of analyze it. And we can't see these things ourselves, but there were loads and loads of titles. But the one I love is called The Buried and the Drowned, which some people, if anyone's not read my fiction, that does say a lot about me. That is true.
Yep.
Super dark little soul. But and I mean, for example, of the ones I've talked about here, Seahenge is very much about the drowned, and De-Extinction of the Nephilim is very much buried. And it's the sort of dangers of messing with what has been buried for so long, and what has been drowned will be drowned again, and all that kind of thing. So the sort of coming up with the title, but it's one of these occasions where I think AI tools can really help, and I love the title. I then asked it, okay, well, I need a cover image. So let's brainstorm that. And I've worked with Jane Dixon Smith, who's been my cover designer for more than a decade now. And so we've got that going. I'm writing a couple of extra stories, which I won't publish separately. So people who have already read the other stories hopefully will want it because there'll be 2 exclusives. One of which will be that Between Two Breaths, and a story called The Black Church, which is where I spent my 50th birthday. I woke up next to the Black Church in Iceland. So writing that, my editor, Kristen, is going to read the whole collection, because another challenge is what order do you put these in? So I'm going to try and figure it out myself, and then I'm going to give it to Kristen, who has edited some of those stories already, but she will read it as a first reader. I'm also expanding the author's note. So all my short stories have very personal author's notes, like where these stories come from. Like another one is about about eyes and having an eye operation. After I had laser surgery a few years ago, it's called With a Demon's Eye. But it's things like that. I've written these sort of super personal author's notes, which, again, coming back to the being human in an age of AI, I feel like that's so important. And putting in the special edition, I'm going to put like that poem I mentioned, which is really about my divorce and my first marriage, and also photos. There's even a really old photo of me scuba diving during that time, back in the days when there wasn't digital cameras and stuff. So I want to make this collection, as you say, it is for super fans. And I'm going to have a really low number on my Kickstarter, but it feels personally very important as part of my 50th year to do something that means so much. But boy, I definitely feel it's been a challenge.
That's great. It sounds fantastic. When do you think it'll all come together? Do you have a date for the Kickstarter yet?
Yeah, I'm aiming for 1st of September. We're recording this in July. So yeah, if people are interested, it is up, jfpenn.com/buried, like the buried and the drowned. So jfpenn.com/buried. And yeah, I think it will. I've bought a lot of short story collections off Kickstarter for people I don't know. And I do actually think Kickstarter is a great place for short story collections. I think there is an audience there who are looking for them. And if you've bought one before, other ones come up in your recommendation algorithm. So I'm kind of hoping that maybe some new people will find them. Because again, people who read poetry, people who, as well as other things. But it's like if you like short stories, then maybe you find other ones about authors. But yeah, I mean, well, what about your collection? Because you actually have quite a lot of poetry collections. So tell us about the process for that.
Yeah, it takes a while, as I said earlier, because I never sit down and say, right, now I'm going to create a collection, or create a poetry book, apart from that epic one that's going to be one big long poem. So I have to wait until there are more than enough on a linked theme. So I have ideas about what that might look like, and I have pinboards on the studio wall, and so I'll be looking for thematic overlaps between different poems or recurring symbols or something like that. And then when they feel like they go together, I have a sense almost like I'm writing a musical piece with them, and of a rise and fall kind of thing. I like to feel that the reader will go in and begin to gather together kind of what I'm saying, and then move more deeply into it, and then kind of ascend out of it. So I usually break them into sections as well. And I have never really, on publishing and the business side for a long time, I didn't really think about poetry in that way. So it was, I put stuff out there, but I didn't go out, doing ad campaigns or anything like that with poetry. So I've been quite unbusinesslike around it really, and perfectly happy to do that, and to see them as something that I write, and people who know me, or who, as you say, who like reading poetry can find them. But then I did start to put together this new, most recent series, which is 12 Poems to Inspire. And this is a bit more commercial because they're written around a particular occasion or event. So there are have 12 about Christmas or that end of year time, new beginnings, Mother's Day, one for Mother's Day, and 12 poems about love for Valentine's Day, that kind of thing. And so these are the ones that I'm going to now begin to bundle together, and I do a Kickstarter and putting together 3 of them, I think, into a collection called Poetry of Light. And then I am going to start, when the season comes around, actually actively promoting them. And so I think these are my most commercial poems, if you like, and the ones that are most likely to, it's worth treating them in that way. So
just on the number there. So you said because I've got some of your thin volumes, so those have 12 in. So when you say there's going to be 3 lots, so you're going to have a collection with 36 poems in, or how do people know when it's enough to do something like a printed edition?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? So yeah, in this case, yes, I specifically decided these short books, they were to really be almost like an expensive gift card, in a situation where you buy somebody a sympathy card, instead buy this slim volume and give them this instead. It'll be more meaningful. They hopefully won't put it in the bin, and it will last. They can come back to it and read it again and again. So that was the idea of them. They were deliberately slim, and in fact, they are illustrated as well. I forgot to say that my daughter has done the illustration. I had my own efforts at illustration, but I'm updating them all now. My daughter has done the illustrations for them. So, they're an experience specifically around a particular thing. So that wouldn't be your typical collection. I have they will be bigger. For example, I have ALLi Now is a collection of mindfulness poetry. I'm not sure how many poems are there, but probably 50. So I think the general consideration for a collection is 50 to 60 poems. Makes a collection depending again on length of poems. So it's difficult to generalize, but that will be, the average, shall we say, for a collection.
And just on the sort of poetry editing side, because as I mentioned, I work with my editor, Kristen, on the individual stories, and then also for the whole collection. And obviously for fiction, I work with editors, as I know you do. But what do you think about editors for poetry, whether an individual poem or for a collection, in kind of understanding the structure of a collection?
Oh, yes. Yeah. Editing is contrary to what, people think. Editing is just as important for poems as it is for fiction and nonfiction, and editors make poems immeasurably better. So, at every level, at the developmental level, in the individual poem, obviously, and copy editing and punctuation choices can make a huge difference to a poem's meaning, actually. So punctuation becomes super important. The shorter the form, the more important it is. So yes, and you need an editor who writes and edits poetry. You can't just, have your usual editor for poetry. I think it has to be somebody who understands, and, who understands both when to step in and when to stay away. So yeah, I think it's really important.
And then I guess the other thing, one of the reasons we do Kickstarters is because we want to produce gorgeous print books. So again, I'm doing green foil for The Buried and the Drowned, which on the cover is going to look awesome. And there'll be a ribbon and sprayed edges and the photos, and the paper will be heavier, and it will just be all the cool things that we can do once we get the Kickstarter money. And, it's not really, you can't really do it otherwise. But also with your collection, are you thinking about some of the sort of beautiful elements? Because of course, poetry and page layout is so important.
Yeah, definitely. And, I think if you're writing poetry is one thing, and, producing poetry books is great. But if you want to start to think about selling poetry, then you have to think about beautiful packaging, I think, because that's essentially what people are looking for when they buy poems, and they want, it can be very subtly beautiful, but the layout of the words on the page becomes all important, and how that page feels. And as you say, if you can make your poetry book look and feel gift worthy, then it has a much better chance of some commercial success. And it should also, I feel, be a coherent emotional experience, the collection. So rather than, here's the first 20 poems I ever wrote, all put together, there needs to be some sense of it working together as a whole, as a collection, and the editor can help with that as well. And I mean, I have had, as I come to, as I begin to bring a collection together, I would then realize I need more poetry for this collection, and I will start to write specifically to finish off that collection. That is definitely something that happens.
Mm-hmm. And then the other thing for the Kickstarter, and in fact in general, I mentioned audio and audio narration. Now, you have actually been quite resistant, I think, to publishing audio of you reading. So what are your thoughts? And of course, you read this poem for your mother and the Milky Way poem on your Go Creative podcast, and it was fantastic. So are you moving into doing more audio?
Yes, boss. I am. And that's why I'm doing it on the podcast. It's to warm myself up. I'm not drawn to doing it, but you and a few other people have said, and I can see myself how it, it's, I would think, always becoming an essential now to, as part of that human thing that we were talking about, to to read yourself. So yes, I am. I'm going to do. Now I do have a little short sampler of my poems out there in audio form, but I did that a very long time ago. 10, I think. At first flush, it's called, is just a sample. But yes, I am going to do these myself and do audio. So when I do this collection and the bundle and everything, I'll have the audio as well.
Well, I mean, you mentioned that. Is it essential? I mean, I probably would have read the poem when you had put it somewhere, but because I'm an audio sort of reader in so many ways, hearing you read that poem, I think, has a lot more impact. And again, as the human element, hearing you read it is so important. So for people who are listening who might be feeling as uncomfortable about it as you have, any tips for getting over that, I guess?
Feel the pain and do it anyway. I don't really know that I'm the right person to give tips about this because, as you say, I have been so, I've kept long fingering it. I just think, for me, not listening back is kind of key. So getting it off to the producer, and I don't want to do my own production, for example, on them. So yeah, I don't. But I'll go through the experience maybe, and then I'll share the tips at the far side. How's that?
Yeah, I think that's good. And I mean, again, talking about the Kickstarter, which I think is a great way to do the poetry collection and the short story collection, is that a lot of people buy audio through Kickstarter. It is one of the best ways to sell audio direct. So, for example, I'd be very interested in buying the beautiful hardback if you're going to do one, and plus the audio as an add-on. That's how I would want your poetry, would be those two editions, so that I would have the nice print book on my shelf, like I've got your Secret Rose beautiful edition on my shelf, and I would prefer to listen than I would to read. So I don't know. I mean, that's how I feel as a consumer, and what I see on my Kickstarters with fiction and nonfiction so far is that people want the bundle with the audio. So even the print book with the ebook and the audiobook as the bundle that they buy. I don't know. Is that something you'll offer?
Yes. And I do think that's a great offer for poetry in particular, actually, and short form. For, we're talking about short stories as well. I think having that combination is a really good thing for short form.
And then I guess before we finish up, we should, because we also talk about business, and I guess the Kickstarter side is business, but marketing. I mean, what do you think about marketing for poetry? I mean, I guess doing the audio is one way, and you can put those out. What else do you see poets doing for marketing?
Well, short form video is huge for poets. And if you can do that well, I'm not going to ever do that, but if you can do that well, that is probably the easiest, best way. And of course, in doing your video, that you can then harvest your audio for your audio book. So you're both producing and marketing at the same time, which is my favorite form of marketing, content marketing. And you don't have to show your face necessarily if you don't, but you can still produce videos. So I see some poets doing, stock footage or AI illustration, or indeed if they're in that way inclined, their own illustrations and music, and putting it all together as a beautiful sort of piece. And that obviously is almost a form in itself. And film poetry is actually an emerging genre, and there's some beautiful and inspiring examples out there if people are attracted to that. But obviously that's very time consuming, so it's much more than just a way of marketing your poetry. But it's video in poetry, like in every other aspect of publishing, is definitely big right now. I think the main thing for poets is to get the poetry out on Substack, on social, on a blog, and I think your email list is super important. It's always important for everybody. But, you are depending on that relationship with your readers in a big way as a poet, I think. And what else is important? Yeah, I think one thing that I would say to people is don't target general poetry magazines or bloggers, or worse again, general book bloggers. People forget that poetry is a macro genre like fiction and nonfiction. It divides up into genres. So there's no point in sending your inspirational poems to the Dark Goth collection. It's not going to work. So you have to research your comparable poets like you would with fiction or nonfiction. And then you find out who's working in that arena and you send them a tailored pitch, or you can swap reading with other poets. I mean, that's how there's a very thriving poetry scene on all of the platforms, I think. Instagram is the one that I'm most familiar with, though I'm not there anymore. I was part of that for a few years and I really loved it. And then there are the magazines and the literary journals and stuff, of which, as I said, I don't do. But if you want to do those, they are hungry for content always. And they like dealing directly with the poet. And they're not inclined to deal with mainstream PR as much. And then I think the other big thing is to build a reader team who will go out and do your early reviews, but also share their favourite lines and talk a bit about the poem. I think that's really important. And I would say don't do ads or any direct promotion until you've seen something work. If you have a reading you do on TikTok or whatever and it goes down well, that's the point at which to invest. But it would be very easy to waste a lot of money and get nowhere.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think for me, a lot of the short story ideas and the poems, we're not looking at the massive spike on launch. Like, I'm not expecting to do a 6-figure Kickstarter on a short story collection. I will probably have my lowest goal of any of my Kickstarters. But the point is that over the years, these sell. So people buy my short stories every day. Some of them I wrote a decade ago. Same with your poems, right? They don't age, these things. They really don't. So I feel like we launch them. We do the Kickstarter, which is a short launch, only a couple of weeks in the end. But the point is that we will keep writing and people will find them over time. So I feel that might take the pressure off some people. Look, just think about this as primarily poetry and short stories are creative things. I mean, you could say all books are creative, but these are very creative. There are very few people who aim to make tons of money with these types of writing. And so it is very much a creative drive and a sort of a piece of your body of work that you want to get into a beautiful print edition. That's kind of how I feel. And then I will do my best. But as you say, I'm not going to spend any money on marketing it. I'm going to put it out there and see what happens.
Exactly. And I think it is important for us to understand a bit about what is commercial, what is creative in our work when when you're building up a body of work. You don't have to give the same marketing treatment to everything you produce. You can go out knowing that you're doing it largely for yourself and for the super fans who kind of like everything you do, or for people who particularly like a particular thing. And, there is absolutely no shame in the opposite, in aiming small sometimes and keep the big guns for the things that are most likely to succeed with a wider audience.
Absolutely. And I guess that brings us back to definition of success and why we write these things. And it really is, as we both said, I think these ideas just come to us and we know that we want to write them as a poem or as a short story. So I guess any finishing thoughts, Orna?
Just that it's brilliant to be indie.
Yeah.
With this stuff. because it can be heartbreaking. I remember back in the day when indie wasn't a thing, and trying to get somebody to be interested, to say yes. It's just great to be able to just put it together, put it out there, see what happens, and not mind too much how it goes. There is a great freedom in that I think is really, really precious.
Fantastic. So yes, you can find mine at jfpenn.com/buried. And if people want to find your collection, Orna?
ornaross.com/nightlight.
Fantastic. Well, thanks for being with us today, everyone. We really hope that you have found this useful, and all the best with writing your own poems and short stories.
Happy writing, everyone, and happy publishing. Bye-bye.
Bye.
You've been listening to Self-Publishing with ALLi, the podcast that brings you all the advice, news, and inspiration an indie author needs today. Thanks to our podcast sponsor, BookVault.app. They enable authors to sell high-quality print-on-demand books, including stunning special editions, directly to readers worldwide. Our creative self-publishing stream is brought to you by Orna Ross's Go Creative program, helping authors harness the power of creative flow in writing and publishing. And if you haven't already, we invite you to join our association and become a self-publishing ally. You can do that at allianceindependentauthors.org.